For decades, we've confused the best animated films with the best animated films. They're not the same. It's one thing to move you with a masterpiece, and another to push the language of animation to its absolute limit. This video isn't about pretty stories, it's about the impossible. Films that took decades to complete, that drew hundreds of thousands of frames by hand, that reinvented techniques and forced the entire industry into territories no one had ever seen. We're not only talking about great films, but about the visual ceiling of cinema, where every single shot is an unrepeatable feat. The Garden of Words is a small, intimate story, the silent encounter between two lonely souls who take refuge from the world under the reign of an urban garden. There's no epic scale and no big twists, only pause and melancholy. The animation doesn't accompany the story, it embodies it. The rain isn't a visual garnish, it's the emotional space where the characters exist. The silence has weight, and every shot breathes with an almost tactile sensitivity. The Garden of Words makes the list not because it's extremely spectacular, but because it's concentrated technical perfection. It's the film where animated hyperrealism reaches its highest point. The rain doesn't look animated, it looks physical. Light filters through and dissolves with astonishing precision. Every shot demands an extreme level of detail in reflections, transparency, and depth, something very few productions can sustain for an entire runtime. Here, animation isn't trying to imitate reality. It elevates it so we can feel what they feel. The effort is insane. Every raindrop breaking on the ground, every reflection on the asphalt, and every blade of grass in Shinjuku Park was treated with surgical precision. The water in this film is probably the best animated element in history. Its viscosity and the way it distorts color are a visual miracle. Shinkai proves that sometimes a single shot of rain falling on a pond can transmit more pain and hope than 1,000 lines of script. If we're talking about impossible feats, Loving Vincent is the literal definition of the term. It's not only the first feature film in history painted entirely in oil, it's a miracle of human persistence that defies industrial logic. The soul of this work is a posthumous conversation with Van Gogh, an investigation into his death that uses his own visual language to try to understand his tormented mind. It's the art of a genius coming to life, not to decorate, but to narrate its own testament. Technically, the numbers are dizzying. More than 100 artists from around the world, selected from thousands, were needed to hand-paint each of the 65,000 frames that make up the film. Imagine the effort. It's not drawing a line. It's replicating Vincent's physical brushstroke, impasto, and color vibration in every second of footage. Each frame is a real oil painting on canvas that had to be altered brushstroke by brushstroke to create movement. The complexity isn't only in the fluidity of motion, but in the human and artistic endurance required to sustain this method across an entire feature film. The result is an image that breathes, that pulses, that has a physical vibration no software can replicate. If we're talking about animation pushed to the physical and mental limit, Mad God is the most extreme thing in the industry. Phil Tippett, the genius behind the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park, turned his back on the industry to lock himself in a studio for 30 years. While the world surrendered to easy CGI, he spent decades building, moving, and destroying a nightmare universe frame by frame, finishing a work that feels like a message sent from an era when art still hurt. Formally, it's a cathedral of stop motion. Every creature, every landscape, every mechanism was built by hand, lit physically, and animated frame by frame. We're not talking about clean, stylized puppets, but organic textures, rust, flesh, dust, and real decay. The camera moves through miniatures that feel tangible, with a depth and volume no render can imitate. It's a battle cry against the disposable. In a market flooded with computer-generated images you forget instantly, Mad God burns into your retina because it's real. You can feel the weight of the rusted metal, the trace of the animator's fingers in every sequence, and the actual degradation of materials. It's the visual ceiling of physical animation. If you thought this list would only be filled with dark experiments, you're wrong. Spirited Away is here because it represents the absolute ceiling of traditional animation. While Hollywood was celebrating the rise of 3D with Shrek, Hayao Miyazaki stood his ground with a film where every frame feels like it was breathed into existence by a craftsman. The story of this girl lost in a bathhouse for gods isn't just a tale. It's a visual choreography of dizzying technical complexity. It doesn't need style explosions or formal rupture to impress. Its greatness lies in invisible perfection. everything flows with a naturalness that hides the titanic effort behind every shot, carried as well by one of the greatest scores ever composed. Spirited Away doesn't try to prove animation can be extreme. It proves it can be total. A closed, self-sufficient, perfectly animated universe where absolutely nothing feels artificial. And that naturalness, in a medium this complex, is one of the greatest feats imaginable. Before animation became an industry, a franchise, or an algorithm, there was Fantasia. The film was commercial suicide. It has no fixed protagonist and no linear plot. In 1940, Disney decided to turn classical music into pure image. To animate Bach, Tchaikovsky, or Stravinsky, not as background sound, but fused with animation itself. And for its time, that was madness. Technically, Fantasia was a historical anomaly. In an era of flat drawings, Disney developed the multiplane camera, a 2-meter-tall structure that allowed different drawing layers to be separated to create real depth. For segments like The Sorcerer's Apprentice or The Rite of Spring, the animators studied the real physics of water, fire, and volcanic movement for months. They weren't drawing cartoons. They were trying to replicate the chaos of nature with pencil and paper. What makes Fantasia relevant today isn't only innovation, but ambition. It dared to say animation could be total art, that it could converse with classical music and aspire to transcendence. It wasn't trying to entertain you for 90 minutes. It was trying to elevate the entire medium. Fantasia is the moment animation decided it wanted to become high art. If animation has a point of no return, that point is called Akira. In 1988, when anime was still seen as a niche product, Katsuhiro Otomo built a super production that seemed to come from the future. In an industry that usually saved costs by animating at 8 or 12 frames per second, Akira jumped into the void by animating almost everything at a true 24 frames. To give you a sense of the scale of this insanity, more than 160,000 frames were used, and a palette of 327 colors, 50 of which were created exclusively for this film. Everything, absolutely everything, from Neo Tokyo's skyscrapers to the light trails of the bikes, was painted by hand. The complexity reaches absurd levels in the lip sync. Akira was one of the first productions to record the voices before animating, allowing the facial muscles of the characters to move with a chilling anatomical precision. Akira wasn't just a great animated film. It was the moment the world understood animation could be adult, brutal, and monumental at the same time. Princess Mononoke is, quite simply, the greatest animated film in cinema history. Not because it's the most spectacular or the most technically innovative, but because it allows animation to reach its fullest form. Myth, tragedy, soul-level love, philosophy, and living matter in perfect balance. It's the moment traditional drawing came of age and decided to go feral. Miyazaki didn't want a fable. He wanted an epic where nature isn't scenery, but a bleeding god. Its psychological depth is overwhelming. There are no villains, only forces in collision, and that moral complexity is reflected in every stroke. The perfectionism was extreme. Miyazaki ended up with his right hand wrecked, wearing a brace, after personally supervising and retouching nearly 80,000 of the film's 144,000 frames. If a shot didn't transmit the weight of blood or the fury of a fallen god, it was discarded. That was the bar. The result is palpable brute force. The opening demon, a mass of black tentacles almost impossible to animate, pushed the team to the limit. And yet the true miracle is how the spiritual becomes tangible. The forest spirit, with every step giving life and death, is pure visual poetry. It's a physical film. You can feel the metal, the wet fur, and the impact of every arrow. But also the wind, the beauty, and the purest twin soul love. It's Studio Ghibli's ceiling, the point where craftsmanship became legend. There are films that are planned and films that are endured, but Redline was collective suicide. Imagine dedicating 7 years of your life to drawing a racing film. Imagine that while the entire world is surrendering to 3D to cut costs, you decide that every explosion, Every drop of sweat and every bolt on an engine at 500 kilometers per hour must be drawn and shaded by hand. The result was more than 100,000 pencil drawings, a number that shouldn't exist, a workload that pushed Studio Madhouse to the edge of financial collapse and its animators to the brink of sanity. Here, every frame is on the verge of collapse. Lines deform, colors explode, perspective stretches until it breaks. The animation isn't chasing realism, it's chasing intensity. But what truly puts it on the podium is its contempt for saving money. In a normal production, backgrounds get reused. In Redline, every kilometer of track is a new design. Every spectator in the stands has a unique design. It's the genius of pure adrenaline, a work that feels electric, loud, and sweaty. It's the last great battle cry of traditional 2D animation before technology changed the rules forever. Watching Redline is watching a team of artists giving everything in a race they knew they were going to lose, just to show us what a human being can do with a pencil in their hand. The tale of the Princess Kaguya is a miracle that almost didn't happen. Studio Ghibli had to create a special department just for this project, because what Takahata demanded was impossible by modern standards, a film drawn entirely with charcoal strokes and watercolor. The story adapts a 1,000-year-old Japanese legend, but what makes it unique is how the form translates Kaguya's inner state. When she's happy, the image is light and luminous. When the world suffocates her, the drawing tears apart. Kaguya's complexity lies in its apparent simplicity. Each frame looks like a spontaneous sketch, but sustaining that aesthetic for 2 hours with absolute fluidity is one of the most exhausting tasks an animation team has ever faced. It was an enormously complex and lengthy production, precisely because it rejected standardization. Every shot demanded unique decisions of color, texture, and movement. The result is a film that seems fragile, yet has extraordinary formal audacity. Kaguya proves animation doesn't need volume, shine, or hyperrealism to reach an artistic ceiling. Sometimes a trembling line can transmit more truth than 1,000 digital effects. Across the Spider-Verse is, by far, the best animated film of all time. To give you a sense of the magnitude, this movie needed more than 1,000 animators, the largest team ever assembled for an animated feature, working for 4 years to break every rule Pixar and Disney spent decades building. The previous entries perfected one style. Here, we're talking about dozens. Each universe has its own rules of color, texture, and movement. Gwen lives in watercolors that shift with her emotional state. Moombahton blends Indian architecture with 60s comics and impossible perspective. Miguel O'Hara's world is aggressive, angular, almost sculptural. Even the animation's frames per second varies depending on the character and their evolution. Miles Morales starts moving at a different rhythm than everyone else, and the technique itself reflects his growth. Here, hand-drawn 2D, volumetric 3D, dynamic inked lines, printed textures, digital glitch, shadows that look like screen print, and effects that imitate ink on paper all coexist. Every shot is composed with overwhelming visual density. Layers of color, grain, floating lines, and hyper-complex backgrounds that never sacrifice narrative clarity. Across the Spider-Verse isn't trying to look real. It's trying to prove animation can simultaneously be comic, painting, sculpture, and cinema. And that's why it's the most extreme thing animation has ever produced. As you've seen, animation isn't a genre for kids. It's the canvas where the impossible becomes tangible. If you truly love cinema, subscribe, hit like, and tell me which one you'd add.